involved in presenting this program would be stretching it just a bit, although all of us had a part in it. But the fellow that really got behind this whole program and got it for us was Ralph Mosier Sr. He's a former director and vice president and president of Club 29, and he so exemplifies the quality that I have come to know in so many of you. All you have to do is turn a project to an individual Rotarian and get out of the way, or they'll flat run over you. And we're indebted to him for so much of the work that has gone today to make this program possible. The Rotary program is a tribute, a salute to Oklahoma heritage. As President Jim mentioned, this is Oklahoma Heritage Week. I'm sure that many of you have heard and seen this advertised on the television and the radio. We are very rich in the heritage that's been left to us by many of the early day Oklahomans. Friday is Oklahoma Statehood Day. We're fortunate today to have some men with us who have had a hand in writing or creating Oklahoma history. Their accomplishments in our community are legion. The results of their work will benefit our fellow Oklahomans for many, many years to come. The first man I would like to introduce to you is Stanley Draper. And President Jim warned me, now don't get carried away with this, Ralph, because I don't know what system he has of ringing the bell. It's probably a mall bell or a southwestern bell if I get carried away too much in the introductions. I could speak for 45 minutes on our speakers. But our first speaker is Stanley Draper. No ordinary pattern of biographical sketch can be used realistically in introducing our speaker, because the man himself, his temperament, his abilities, and his methods follow no ordinary pattern. His only consistency is that of getting a job done by whatever method or pattern is required to do it. Stanley Draper uses people as men use money or machines. His only purpose is to do the job as it should be done. Hardworking, resourceful, colorful, ambitious for his beloved Oklahoma City. Not self-seeking, intolerant of mechanics. All these and other terms apply to the average day's activities. Born in 1889 in the community of Laker, North Carolina, Stanley Draper came to Oklahoma City after graduating from Chicago University, serving in World War I as an officer in the 3rd Division Regular Army, which saw frontline action in France. The year was 1919 when he joined the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce as assistant manager. In 1927, he was promoted to managing director, and after 37 years retired, but not from doing impossible projects for the city he loved so much. Among his many achievements are Will Rogers Field, the National Aviation Clinic, the Douglas Aircraft Assembly Plant, Tinker Field, and so on and on and on. It's impossible to outline all of the accomplishments of this great citizen. So with that, I will give you Stanley Draper, who will tell you about the track makers that made Oklahoma City what it is today. His subject is early day individuals in Oklahoma City. I'm pleased to present Stanley Draper.
Thank you very much, young people. It's very interesting to observe how you men have grown in the last 10 years. Most of you full grown now. We congratulate you for all the good you're doing in the Rotary Club and otherwise in Oklahoma City. It is well today that we take note of Oklahoma's birthday. Oklahoma didn't lay around in a hospital somewhere to be born after 9 months. It was born and run, one run after the other, right out in the open. That's Oklahoma. Doesn't dally around too much. It was born in the womb of adventure. And so it's been always with Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a way of life. It's not just territory bounded this way and that way. It's a way of life. If you study the history of Oklahoma, more and more you'll find it that way. There was a time when I didn't have any patience whatever towards history or things of the past. I was interested, like other Oklahoma City people, leaders, or like the leaders that I worked under. I was interested in innovation, newness, growth, no patience with the past. Now I'm right in the middle of heritage and enjoying it. I must tell you one experience, and I got to watch that clock. My gosh, the time does roll around when you're talking about Oklahoma. I must tell you that I came from Dismal Swamp Country, North Carolina. My people were hard-working farm people, good Christian people. We were Methodist. We were dedicated to save the Baptist. The only sinners we had in our neighborhood were Baptists. The Baptists had a little church too, and they felt the same way about the Methodists. Now that's the day when I talk about the sinners. I hadn't met Ray Young yet. Not the leading Baptist. He's our leading Baptist. The fact are, I was scheduled by my mother to be a home missionary, and I was going to be a home missionary to save the Baptist. I'm going to tell you an incident of how rigid religious people were back there. The presiding elder, or the circuit rider, was going to come our way to make a speech on a certain Sunday morning. Well, we young people want to do something resourceful and have a good showing for our presiding elder. So we had an oyster supper, and raised a little money for the church. The next morning, the presiding elder's sermon was featured on the ills of raising money except through the sacrificial way. And he condemned the idea of oyster supper. He says, think of it, 3 little innocent oysters, 100 miles away from their native habitat, swimming in an inland sea of grease, and sold for 25 cents in the name of the Lord. Gentlemen, it's sinful, it is sin, so we had to go up and get converted again. It was out of that I came by way of the Army into fast-moving, open-minded Oklahoma City. My, what a town, what a town. Nearly 100,000 people, bright lights, beautiful women, and such as I never saw. I fell right into it and took up cigarette smoking and dancing. I was enjoying sin generally. Dr. Hudson came to see me one day, pastor of St. Luke's Church. He said, Stanley, I want you to be superintendent of St. Luke's Sunday School. Dr. Hudson, no, I can't do that. Now, I mentioned him because he's one of those great characters of early day. I can't do that. I'm not qualified in any sense of the word. I'm spiritually, educationally, or temperamentally otherwise. He said, Stanley, I know it. I've got 2,000 members of my church, St. Luke's. There's not a man in there fit to be superintendent of Sunday school. You're just as good as I've got. And I've got to use what the Lord gives me, hoping and praying that you'll improve as time goes along. I was superintendent 11 years. Then there's so many things in those days that we could tell about that we dare not. For instance, this 10-minute deal, I told Harvey he could have my 10 minutes. It would take Harvey 20 minutes to tell about our first night out. So I'm safe now because he can't tell it in 10 minutes. Anyway, I'll tell you about one man particularly, Bill Pettit. He was typical of the people of Oklahoma City, of the leaders. And no young man ever had the opportunity that I had of meeting with these fine leaders. I did not know the early days, the first crop, but I came along behind them under the leadership of the second crop. It's improved as time has gone along, the leadership of the community. Well, this was Bill Pettit. Bill Pettit made the run. He was resourceful. He conceived the idea that a lot of people were going to come to this place and they wouldn't need cooking utensils and things like that. So he loaded up his wagon. And so he brought along his store with him and set up a store on Main Street and did well. He loved his poker. He loved his whiskey. He was a good man, though. And in Walden days, in the Ku Klux Klan days, Walden, the mayor, had it in for the Chamber of Commerce and for Bill Pettit. He caught Bill on the corner of the street, or the chief police did, with a bottle in his pocket, drunk. The next morning when I came down to the office, the Oklahoma News was paraded up and down in front of the office. Bill Pettit, Chamber President, spends night in jail. Well, we just had 2 or 3 lynchings around, and I was getting scared. The fact is, I found out later they had a trap set for me too, because I didn't go out and dance that night, so they didn't catch me. I'm gonna tell you, the young lady in charge of our dining room came to see me one day. Says, Mr. Draper, they're organizing the girls in the dining room. I says, organizing? I said, well, sure. I'm organizing the chamber. I organize Farmers Union. I organize this and that. Why not? I didn't know anything about labor union. Didn't know what the purpose is. Well, the trap was set for me. Grace Ann was going home to visit the people and asked me to learn to dance while she was gone. So I went down to the old auditorium. I went that night. That night that Bill Pettit was in jail to dance. A young lady came over to see me and wanted me to take her home. I had to dance with her. This was this girl that was doing the organizing. And she wanted me to take her home. I asked me to. Well, I had other ideas. I didn't. But her husband was secretary of the Typographical Union of Oklahoma News. And they set the trap for me to catch me to spend the night with Bill Pettit in jail. It was dangerous living, but fun. Well, anyway, Bill spent the night in jail and came down about 10:30 in the morning. Said, Stanley, I know you're ashamed of me. Fact is, I don't feel too good about it myself. But I want you to know, young man, when Bill Pettit dies, it's going to be the damnedest funeral in this town you ever saw. And there was. I said, Mr. Pettit, you know the board meets today noon. Sure, I know about that. I haven't forgotten it. I said, you're going to be with us? Sure, I'm going to preside. I'm a better man drunk than those bastards are sober. I said, Mr. Pettit, you know, Mr. McAdoo is going to be with us next week. He's going to speak at the chamber. And he's going to dedicate the YMCA. That's part of the Kerr McGee building now. And shall we invite the mayor, the man who put you in jail? He says, of course we'll invite the son of a bitch. If never he said of old Bill Pettit that he wasn't fair. And he couldn't. I want you to know this about Bill Pettit and those early old-timers. They were good, they were rough, they were tough, they were loud, they were soft-spoken, good people. I do hope that if such is the kingdom of heaven of these old-timers. Now, they wouldn't get along today so well. They could have. Today, they'd handle a good-sized company, but they weren't generals as we have today. There's one thing about the people back there when they'd knife in the back and they'd cut your throat just like they do now. But they'd brag about it. You know who did it. Today, you don't know exactly who did it. They're doing it just the same, though. Well, so much for this. Now, let me tell you about a late day deal. I might say this, as I said, no one ever had the privilege I've had I've served under 28 presidents of the Chamber of Commerce. They're all dead except 9, and half of them are sick. But good people. One of those old-timers still living is, I wouldn't say old-timers, is a latecomer, really, is Ed Gaylord. When he was president of the Chamber, he said, Stanley, he said, Bob Kerr and Ray Young are trying to make a Baptist out of me, and here you are trying to make a Methodist of me. Keep Sil Goldman away from me.
thank you, Stanley Draper. That's wonderful. Our next participant in the program is Harvey P. Everest. Harvey was born in the Sunflower State of Kansas and became a resident of Oklahoma City in 1899. He attended Lincoln Grade School in Oklahoma City and then Central High School, and I'm sure that he knew it as OHS because I did, and was a member of the Jeffersonian, he was a Jeff, Debate Society. He also attended the University of Oklahoma. At the age of 17, he became engaged in his first business venture when he bought the Saturday Evening Post route from a young friend. Through the years, this venture expanded into the largest magazine distribution business in the United States. While I'm on the subject of publications, we're grateful to the newspaper coverage which we've had of this Oklahoma Heritage Week here this week, in addition to the radio and TV. Harvey served his nation as an officer in the Navy during World War II. He's now honorary chairman of the board of the Liberty National Bank and Trust Company in Oklahoma City. He served as the bank's president from 1955 to 1967 and as chairman of the board from November 67 to December 31, 1970. Under his 12 years of leadership as president, during which its deposits and capital structure more than doubled, the Liberty experienced its greatest period of growth. He served under two governors as chairman of the Oklahoma Industrial Finance Authority, an industrial development revolving loan fund created by the governor to provide financing for industrial expansion throughout the state and especially in the distressed areas. He is chairman of the executive committee at Phillips University in Enid, and the new administration building on campus at Phillips is named the Everest Administration Building in recognition of the many years of devoted service to this educational institution. Harvey was one of the founders and is now vice president of the executive committee of the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation, an organization dedicated to research in the field of medicine and science. He's a director of the Frontiers of Science, an organization devoted to the development and advancement of science through organized education and public information programs. He has served on the board of St. Anthony Hospital, United Fund, YMCA, YWCA, Chamber of Commerce, Oklahoma City Symphony, and so on and so on, for a long list of organizations in the field of education, health, charity, recreation, and civic work. It's not by accident that Liberty adopted the motto, "The bank that's friendly." I suspicion it was because of the outstanding personality of our next speaker, Harvey Everest, who speaks on early Oklahoma City. Harvey?
Thank you for that introduction. It only took up about a half of my time. You told them more things about me than they wanted to know, I'm sure. You know, it's very difficult to follow somebody like Stanley Draper, who speaks of the time from 1919 on to the present. Although I came here in 1899, I was a student until 1917, so I did not become a very active participant until the late 1920s. But I certainly do know a great deal about early Oklahoma history. My father made the run into Oklahoma in 1889 with his brother, and then returned to Kansas, but brought his family back in 1899. At that time, most of the population of about 12,000 lived south of Reno, but a few of the so-called rich people lived on 4th, 5th, and 6th Streets between Santa Fe Tracks and Walker. I say so-called rich folks because I don't believe there was a single person in Oklahoma City who could have raised as much as $10,000 in those times. You know, Mr. Gaylord came in 1902, and by his own admission, he only had a capital of about $3,000, which he invested $2,000 in a half interest in the Oklahoman, which proved to be a fairly profitable investment over the years, I think. In 1899, there was not a single bit of pavement in Oklahoma City. and the downtown streets were always full of dust or full of mud, one or the other. My father was vice president of the Bank of Commerce located at the southwest corner of Main and Broadway. And a block south was the City Hall. And in between that were 5 or 6 saloons and gambling houses, most of whom did business with my father's bank. But the owners of one of those saloons were 2 fellows who'd come down from Enid. And some of you old-timers will remember the names, Logan and Sherman Billingsley, who went to New York and organized the Stork Club, which operated successfully there for 25 years, I guess. And when I'd go to New York occasionally to visit the Stork Club, why, Sherman would always remember the relationship he had with my father in those early days. As a youngster, I was attending school over at Irving School over here on the east side, on Walnut between 3rd and 4th. And one day I was out at recess and noticed a fight going on, which wasn't unusual in those days, plenty of fights. But I ran over there with the rest of the kids and got in the front row, and there was a real big fight going on between a young fella, our school superintendent, his name was Ed Vaught, and a boy by the name of George Hales, who was every bit as big as Ed Vaught. But finally, Ed got him down, and after pounding his head in the cold, hard ground for a while, George Hales gave up, and Ed survived that. Well, that was my first knowledge of Professor Ed Vaught. Well, Professor Vaught went on to night school and studied law, was admitted to the bar, became a member of my Uncle Gene's law firm, Everest, Vaught and Brewer, where he served there for many years, and then was appointed as a federal judge to the Western District of Oklahoma, and served the distinction there for more than 20 years. Ed was a great friend to many of us here in this room now, and many of us knew him well in his leisure hours. He was a fellow who loved to play pitch. He wouldn't play any other card game, but he loved to play pitch. He loved to shoot pool. We used to play pool down the old Oklahoma Club at noontime. And he was certainly not skillful, but he was lucky. He'd win most of the games. He'd slam those balls with his cue. Always managed to get 2 or 3 in the hole. He loved to hunt and fish, and he enjoyed every minute of his great life, and he was a great citizen. You know, I had 15 minutes allotted to me in the first place, and when I got here, they cut it down to 10, and Stanley took about 3 of it, and he took 2. So I haven't got much left. I had some notes, but they aren't much good anymore. In 1903, Charlie Colcord built his home up on 13th Street between Harvey and Hudson, and Henry Overholtz built at 15th and Hudson. And that started a trend of home building to the north and west, which has continued to the present day. In 1899, St. Anthony's Hospital had already been operating for several years in a 3-story brick building located on the Chartel, way out in the country then, between 9th and 10th Streets. And by the way, that first old building was just torn down just a few weeks ago to make room for the construction of the last segment of the new Great Anthony Hospital complex out there. And I want to pay tribute to our May Betty here, who has been the chairman of their board of trustees there for many years. And the hospital wouldn't be performing as it does today had it not been for Babe, for Roland Rodman, for Ross Anthony, for Lynn Bullis. Many of us have served on that board for years. And the hospital has rendered a great service to Oklahoma City and is yet. How much more time have I got left?
We'll take a couple more minutes.
About 2 minutes. Well, you know, I'm going to skip way up to the time of Bob Kerr and quit with that. When Bob Kerr was governor, Bob was always engaged in some enterprise Now, on this occasion, he was raising money, and a lot of money apparently, for some good cause. I've forgotten what it was. But he gave a dinner out at the governor's mansion, and to which I was invited. And when I got there, why, many of my friends were out there, maybe 40 or 50. But I'd no sooner arrived than Bob came bearing down on me. I mean, bearing down. He was a huge fellow, as you know. And Babe Eddie was trailing along in the rear, unwillingly, I thought. By the way, I'd already made up my mind I was going to give $2,000 to that fellow. Well, Bob came up, and without any preliminaries, he said, "Harvey, we think you're sharing this at $10,000. What do you say?" Well, I was shocked, you know. But I thought quickly, but not wisely, as it turned out. Well, I said, "Sure, Bob, I'll give $10,000 if Babe will," because I knew Babe would never give $10,000. But you know, Babe was caught in the squeeze too, and he rather weakly said, "Yes, I'll give $10,000." So we were both caught in that, and we've had many a chuckle over it since. But at that time, it was no laughing matter, I assure you. Bob was a great friend of Oklahoma, a great person in every way, and we miss him yet. Now then, I want to say to the man who introduced us here, she got us crossed up. I was supposed to speak first, because I've lived here for 75 years. I was going to take up some of Stanley's anecdotes, but he beat me to it. So with that now, we'll turn it back to you for your last speaker, Ray Young.
Very fine.
Thank you, Harvey. Our anchor man, our next speaker, is R.A. Young. Ray was born in Stillwater, Oklahoma. He graduated from OSU College of Business in 1924. He began his career as a high school principal and worked with the S.H. Kress and Company in Pueblo, Colorado in 1926. He founded the R.A. Young Company in Kingfisher, Oklahoma in 27. In 1936, he moved to Oklahoma City to become one of the founders of TG&Y Stores Company. He served as president of TG&Y from 1936 to 1964, and presently he is chairman of the board of TG&Y Stores here in Oklahoma City, a nationwide chain. His professional affiliations go on for a long list: Director of Liberty, Metropolitan Y, Chamber of Commerce, Symphony, Art Center, and so forth. Many, many professional affiliations that he is involved in. He's listed in Who's Who in America, and I'm pleased to present Ray Young speaking on Oklahoma Heritage House. Ray?
Thank you. I'm mighty glad to be one of those presidents that Stanley Draper was talking of that's still alive. I do have a little advantage on them. They're both older than I am, but I'm the only one of the three of us that was born in this country. I was born in Indian Territory. You know, I found Stanley Draper and Harvey Everest really hard to follow. I've never followed Harvey before, but Stanley many times, and I don't like to say much against him, because especially if he has a chance to speak later, because he always has an answer. Even with his doctor here a while back, he went to the doctor and he was feeling real bad. His left leg was really hurting, and the doctor checked him over carefully, couldn't find a thing wrong with him. He said, "Stanley, that's just an old leg. You're going to have to live with it." He says, "Well, my right leg is the same age and it doesn't hurt." It's been said that the history of the human race has again and again turned on a single soul, and what seemed at the time a mere incident. The soul in this case, I believe, is Stanley Draper, whose dream was to develop the Oklahoma Heritage Association. There's been a rising surge of interest in Oklahoma's rich heritage and history. You know, we live next door to Texas. We've been hearing these Texas stories all our lives, but talk what you want to, they're really proud of Texas. I heard the other day of the Texan that had just got him a new gold-plated car. It had diamond-studded hubcaps. And someone says, "Man, aren't you afraid it'll get stolen?" He says, "Oh, I don't intend to drive it outside of Texas." Then the early day, there was a Texan that lived in Houston, and he went by train to Amarillo. Went one way and came back the next. And the rest of his life, he bragged to everybody he'd been around the world. But you know, we kid these Texans, but they're proud of their state, and it's time we Oklahomans adopted their policy. In Oklahoma City, it is being centered, this pride in Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma Heritage Center. In fact, one of the most remarkable stories of recent Oklahoma City history is the development of the Oklahoma Heritage Center. It started with the gift of the Hefner Mansion to the Oklahoma Heritage Association in January of 1971. The center is located at 14th and North Robinson Street. You may not know much about it, but you know since it opened about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we've had over 17,000 guests go through the house. The house was built in 1917 by F.L. Mulkey and was bought by Judge and Mrs. Hefner in 1927. The Hefners had been acquiring fine furniture and art objects for many years, and they needed a large, distinguished home for their collection. After buying the Mulkey house, they continued to travel and purchase extensively in Europe and in the Orient, and they bought through selected agents here in the United States. Over the years, the Hefners continued to add to their collection of art, china, antique furniture, canes, bells, and so forth. As we know, Mrs. Hefner died in 1962 and the judge in 1971 when he was 96 years old, and as we know, a very widely honored person. He and his children had already decided to give the home and all the furnishings, all of the art, to the Oklahoma Heritage Association, and this gift was announced in 1970. Work on refurnishing and restoring the house was begun in 1971. Some of the items of interest in this house is they have 14 chandeliers throughout the house. A New York collector offered $100,000 for these 14 chandeliers. They have a Louis XVI plaque table made for the King of France in 1780. It was probably carried out of the Palace of Versailles during the French Revolution. They have probably the largest collection of glassware, Meissen glassware that you'll find in the state of Oklahoma. They have, as I say, magnificent antique furniture throughout the house. They also have one of the finest cane collections and one of the finest bell collections you'll find in the Southwest. The galleries of the Oklahoma Hall of Fame are located on the third floor of the mansion. More than 100 portraits and busts of Oklahomans who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame are found on this third floor. New facilities have been added. If you know Stanley Draper had anything to do with it, he has improved it. And I might say right here that he's done it all on money that has been received. When we get through, we're not going to owe any money on it, so we're not asking you for anything. The new facilities have been constructed to create the Heritage Center. First, we have the Oklahoma Heritage Galleria, and through a substantial gift by Babe Eddie, this was made possible. It was formally opened last Friday night, November the 9th. There's a current display of art there by Dr. George Sutton of OU. He has his bird paintings. If you haven't seen George Sutton's bird paintings, we recommend you go up. You'll never have a better chance than right now. They're all up there. The next display will be Willard Stone's wood sculpture. Then we have the Hefner Memorial Chapel. This is a family chapel furnished as it might have been if it had been built when the mansion was first constructed. It was provided by the Hefner family and decorated by Warren Ramsey. It's indeed a beautiful sight. The Shepherd, Oklahoma Heritage Library is another one of our features. This is a new building. It is a new research facility on Oklahoma history. It also is a beautiful room, and books about Oklahoma or by Oklahoma authors are being collected there. For example, Dr. Cross has given us a large number of books from his library, and Mr. Stanley Draper has given us also a large number of books. There's a special on the front page, the donor's name is put in there as a memorial gift to the library. If you have any books on Oklahoma that you think are rare, we're certainly interested in them. The library also will be used for educational meetings. And then last, we have the Anthony Oklahoma Heritage Gardens. And this was boosted by a generous donation by Mr. C.R. Anthony. The new Anthony Oklahoma Heritage Gardens are virtually complete in spite of all the rains we've had all spring and summer. It's a wonder. There's a wonderful variety of trees, shrubs, flowers, and so forth will adorn this garden, and fountains and brick walkways will enhance its beauty. Tommy Roberts was the architect, but being around there, I'll tell you, the Stanley Draper, I believe, really managed it. All of the facilities are part of the tours of the Oklahoma Heritage Center. Thus, the wonderful gift of the Hefner family has become the Oklahoma Heritage Center, a facility Oklahomans can be justly proud. It is yet another example of the great spirit of community development which has been characteristic of Oklahoma City throughout the years. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Draper and Mr. Everest and Mr. Young, Mr. Browne, come right up here. You're entitled to some rebuttal time.
I'm going to shock them.
You going to really shock them?
Yeah.
Come right on up here.
I had no idea that I'd say this
Step right on up here so they can all hear
when
you.
I came here, but this is the second kind of a program that I've attended since I've been a member of this organization. I came here in 1922 and joined the Rotary Club, and right after that, we had a meeting with the chamber, with this club did, on the city buildings. That time, Ed Overholser was president of the Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Nichols was the chief city builder. So they had those two men on the program. Ed Overholser made a report of how the city had progressed since he'd been here, and especially since he'd been the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Then Dr. Nichols followed him and telling what a part he played in building up Oklahoma City and the different additions he'd made. And he went in to elaborate on them, and I won't do that. And after they concluded, Sam Shevlin then was president. He said, well, gentlemen, I had aspirations once to build a city myself. He said, I was a mayor of Jet. And after trying to build a city out of Jet, I decided it'd be better to move to a city that's already built. So here I am in Oklahoma City.
Thank you so much. That's a real jewel, a dividend for us. Well, we've had a good time, and we have such a fine state, and we have so much to be proud of. Friday, they're opening an exhibit over
years is going to be how long? This is Mary B. Roberts, and I am recording an interview this afternoon with Mrs. Kennedy, Mrs. Maybelle Kennedy. We will find that she has many credits that I won't try to name just at this time, but we always remember her as the Oklahoma woman who became the Assistant Treasurer of the United States. Her career has been long, interesting, and from the stories that I have heard, I'm sure that this is going to be a most informative tape. Mrs. Kennedy, would you begin, please, by telling us your maiden name and your married name, and spell the names for us on tape?
My maiden name was Maybelle McClintock, and I married Edmund T. Kennedy, a city slicker from Kansas City. At a very early date. He came to Oklahoma. He was the early Oklahoma banker, and he and Jim Berry, who you remember as your past governor, were in a bank together in Ralston, Oklahoma, and they ran the little bank and were roommates.
Oh.
And
How do you
then
spell McClintock?
McClintock.
And that was your maiden name?
That was my maiden name, yes. And then my husband bought the little bank at Wahuska, the National Bank of Commerce, where we still do business and still own. And my son is now the president of it. I am the chairman of the board of directors, which is not too heavy a job, may I add.
But still interesting. Keeps you busy.
Very interesting, keeps me abreast of what's going on more than anything else.
Well, you've always had an interest in finance then, haven't you?
I have. After the death of my husband, which was almost 40 years ago now, I was left with 5 children, and I had never done a day's business in my life because I never went to college. I graduated from boarding school, but I never went to college because I married young. And so I took a course from the American School of Banking, and then I took a course at the A&M College it was then in ranch management. And that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do because all I'd ever had was high school botany. And the palatability and nutritive value of native grasses and weeds almost threw me. It was really a tough course for me.
Well, did your family come to Oklahoma?
We came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon.
About
My
what year?
my mother was not well. Well, how long would 75 years ago be?
Well, it'd be about 1898, wouldn't it?
1898, somewhere around there. And she was not well, and we first came. Daddy had a cousin, and he drove an extra wagon, so we had the 2 wagons. We were almost a month, well, we were more than a month, coming from Missouri down here, simply because it was a picnic the whole way. We would not get up too early, and we would stop at any nice spot we saw by a stream or somewhere. We'd buy eggs and milk and chickens from the farmers along the way, you know. And we children had a royal time out of it. Of course, I had my 10th birthday in Oklahoma, so that's why I say this. I was young enough to thoroughly enjoy it, and I had 2 younger brothers, then a sister who was 9 years younger than I am, and she was just a baby. But we loved the trip. And we first went to Enid. We landed out by Enid and Garber. And my mother disliked it intensely because of the winds. The winds out there at that time were really very severe. As I was saying, my mother disliked it intensely. And many people out there lived in sod houses. Now, we never lived in a sod house, but I have visited them, and I've seen them. And, I enjoyed them thoroughly. I thought as a child it was just wonderful, those big, deep sod houses. And I must say, they were very cool in the summer and quite warm in the winter. And then this was in a Garber, a little town near Enid. And it was nothing but just a little town. So, Mother not liking it, Daddy went to Ponca City and was sort of looking around where we should locate. We really weren't located permanently. And he went to Ponca City, and when he was in Ponca City, they told him that across the river in the Osage were woods and hills and trees and things that were more like we had in Missouri. So we went across over there and looked around, and it was an Indian reservation. And you had to pay $2 a year to live in it, to the government. That was your fee. So he went home and told Mother about it, and they took a trip over there, and she loved it. And so we made our home then in the Osage. And we lived first on a farm where Fairfax now is. Then the boys got a little older. I was sent back to Missouri for boarding school because I had a southern grandmother that thought no girl should ever be in this part of the world. And I was always sent back, but my brothers went to school here. And they got old enough to go to school, so they moved to Ralston and put them in school there because there was no Fairfax. And that is where we lived then for several years, and that's where I met my husband and married him. And then we went to Pawhuska.
Was he a rancher?
No, he was a banker.
Oh.
He and Jim Berry, like I tell you, were
Yeah.
in this little bank together in Ralston.
Mm-hmm.
Jim's father owned it. And Ed had a chance, my husband had a chance to buy this bank over in Pawhuska. So he bought the controlling interest of that. And we've been there ever since. Still controlling interest.
Yeah.
And my son is now the president of it, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
And you're the...
as I told you, I'm chairman of the board,
Oh,
which gives me all the gossip of the banking world, I guess. That's what you call it. Anyway, it's a very delightful job. I have no great qualms about it. And I think it was through this and through my politics, after Mr. Kennedy's death, I took these courses I told you of
mm-hmm.
in banking and in agriculture. And
Did you find it very difficult going?
no, I didn't find the banking at all difficult. I say it all, it was all work. But that wasn't difficult, but the botany was.
Mm-hmm.
In the agriculture department. That was very difficult because I hadn't had anything but high school botany,
And that was a required course,
which
I
told
guess.
me about leaves and stems and things like this. And the course that I almost flunked down there was the palatability and nutritive value of native grasses and weeds. And it was a horrible course. After I finished it and everything, they also gave me, and which they did all of them, practical examination on it. And they asked me where I wanted to take mine. I said, well, could I take it on one of our own ranches? For this time we had accumulated land in the Osage. And they said yes, but I would have to wait my turn until the man could have his time, the professor could have his time to come up. I was just ready to go riding one day, held my jodhpurs and ready to go riding when a strange man came to the door, and I opened the door, and he was Professor so-and-so, I forget his name. I said, I'm all ready for you, with my jodhpurs and everything, could think of nothing better. So we went out to what we call Salina Ranch. We have all the ranches named, the Gray Horse Ranch, Salina Ranch, the Comer Ranch. All of these are different ranches, and we've kept the old names to
You've been
them.
holding.
We've kept the old names to
That's
them.
wonderful.
And we went out there, and he first gave me 40 acres, then he cut it to 20, then to 10. And we were standing on a high, and I was to grade how many cattle this would nourish.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took his foot, and he marked out a circle about 10 feet square, or something like this. A circle, it's not square, I know this, but a circle. And he said, now, Ms. Kennedy, will you grade this? I was tired, I was worn, I'd walked over all this, and there was what we call tanks. There, other people call them ponds. Right down over this hill where we were standing. And I said, why don't you take a run and jump in that pond? And he said, you passed. I'm sure had I tried to grade that, he would have flunked me. I'm sure he would, because that would nourish a grasshopper, let alone a head of stock, you know. But at any rate, this one thing led to another, and like I tell you, going into these things and into this, and after paying the big inheritance tax, which now would be nothing, but then I thought was terrible, on Mr. Kennedy's estate, I thought, well, I better find out what makes this clock tick. So that's when I went in politics. And that's what threw me into politics. And I ran for,
Well, that was a great curiosity in finding out why, wasn't it?
yes, I ran for city women's chairman. And I had a little fight over it, but I got it. I mean, I had a hard race.
And that's where you began.
I don't mean I had a fight. I had a hard race. That's where I began, and then I became county.
Well, you did come up.
And
Step
then
at a time. I
came down here and I was known by some of the people. My good friend Roy Turner knew me well, and he was coming into his regime, and I said, Roy, I would like to be National Committee woman. And do you remember Coach McNeil, who was Roy's sidekick and Roy's manager, Roy's friend?
I didn't know the relationship.
And, well, anyway, he
The
said,
friendship.
well, I'll tell you, go see Coach. He said, I'd love to have you, but he said, I don't know what he's done about that. So I went to see Coach, and Coach said, we would be delighted to have you. So there I got my not appointment, but the backing of the governor and of his regime. I also had a contest in that with an older lady from out here at Fairview. She had been National Committee woman before. And I had all sorts of reports coming in all day. I had a room, she had a room, and the politicians would come back and forth, and you're ahead, and she's ahead, and this one's for you, and that county is for you, and this, and that, and the other.
Tell us something about your campaign. How did you?
Well, that was the
How did you really campaign on it? What was your scheme?
Well, my only scheme on this was the betterment of Oklahoma and what I could do for it. I was a younger woman than she was at that time, much younger, and had worked hard in the Democratic Party.
Well, you were pretty well known, too.
I was well known by then, yes. And so at 1 o'clock that night, I just was getting ready to retire. It was because we had an early morning session. And a knock came to my door, and there were 3 men came, one from Ardmore, one from my home county, and another man from Oklahoma City. And they said, Maybelle, it's all over. She's resigned. She's not going to run against you. I said, oh, shoot, I wanted that raise. I really did. I'd worked so hard for it that I wanted the raise. But at any rate, this is what happened. And I will say that I could not have worked with any group of people or men that were as wonderful as that regime was to me. I think of Roy Turner as I think of a brother. And I loved him very dearly, and his wife as well. And Jim Arrington, as you remember, was at that time co-chairman. He was, and Elmer Harbor was National Committee man. So we had quite an alliance and quite a team. And they took me in as though I was one of them. I went with them when they financed the Turner Turnpike. I went back to every trip they made to Washington. I went with them. And we had a marvelous cooperation throughout the whole thing. Not that we always agreed, because we would sit down and talk a problem over and sort of rationalize on it. And it really, I think, worked out very well for the future of Oklahoma. I think it was a progressive year.
His was a very progressive administration.
Very progressive administration.
You remember the mental health?
Yes,
One
mental
of
health was
one of his
established.
babies.
Was
And-
established then,
Yes. And,
as were many others.
yes.
And where do I go from here? What do I tell you from here? Oh yes, from then, I became more and more known in National Committee and in national affairs. And 2 men came to me, one from St. Louis, whose name I won't mention, one from Ohio. And they said, Maybelle, if you'll throw in with us and help us the women, we'll run this National Committee. And I said, I'm all for it. And they were honest but smart men with ideas of what we should do for the country and what action we should take as a national committee. They were men who were well known and prominent men, I must say, and were delightful in every respect. And my term began shortly after that. Well, I was in Chicago for the National Convention when the word came that Marion Glass had died, who was Senator Glass's sister. And they said, "There's your appointment." And I said, "What do you mean, my appointment?" They said, "We're going to put you in as assistant treasurer." And I said, "Oh, no, do you think I could do that?" And they said, "Why not? You've had this training, and you can certainly do it."
Well, your background was so good for it.
So I didn't have anybody else, as I know, that ran against me at all, and President Truman did appoint me. And the years I spent in Washington were most pleasant, most beneficial, and most knowledgeable, I must say, because I learned a very great deal about a great many things. And I had known, of course, Senator Barkley very well before this time. And he called...
Tell us something about Senator Barkley.
He was a darling man.
He was a great man.
He was a darling man. He called, had his secretary, Lorraine, call me one day and asked me if I could be at his office at 10 o'clock. And I said, "Lorraine, you know I can be there. If the senator wants me, you know I'll be there." And I went to the door, and the door was open, and he came with his arms outstretched, and he said, "Maybe I'll have something to give you." And I said, "Well, marvelous, what is it?" He said, "I'm going to give you Jane's seat in the gallery because she never goes and doesn't like it. And I see you there time after time. Every time I'd have a chance to get away from work, I would slip over to the Senate or the Congress and hear the arguments because I loved hearing them. I loved what they were debating on."
Well, it kept your finger on the pulse.
And, well, I know, I was just interested to that degree. And so I had this seat. Well, when I would hand my little card out, the Secret Service would take me in and lead me around to this seat as though I was somebody really, truly great.
It must have been a thrill.
Oh, it was a great thrill. And I was there for the princess she was then, and Prince of Wales. I was there for the MacArthur.
Yes, that's right.
I was there during all of those times and had this prize seat. I never ceased to thank him, and I thought he said, "If you ever tell this on me, I will declare you a liar." And I said, "I never shall." And Georgia would say to me, she was the treasurer, she'd say, "Why have you such an interest in the Senate?" She never went. I said, "I've always been interested in the Senate." But I never even told my family, I never told anybody that I had that seat. Because if he was big enough to give it to me, I certainly felt it was good enough to keep. So I never even told this. After I left the Treasury, I came back to, I stayed 3 months in the Treasury during the, I'll go back a little bit, during the Eisenhower administration. I was not reappointed, nor was I fired. And I drew my salary just the same. But I didn't want to stay on. This was Ivy Baker Priest coming in, whom I had known for years. She was on the Republican National Committee, but I'd known Ivy for several years before this.
She followed you.
She followed. And she said, "Oh, please stay on with me, because I don't know anything about this thing." And I said, "Ivy, I'll stay on when you find somebody, but you must promise me you'll find someone." Well, you see, the election was in November, and the inauguration was in January, and in April she still hadn't found anybody. I was still wagging along doing my job. And I wrote another letter to the president, my second letter of resignation, as all letters, all presidential appointees write a letter of resignation at the time of the election. It doesn't matter whether it's your party or the other party. And I wrote my second letter to President Eisenhower, and I had no answer from it, as I'd had no answer from my first one. So I waited, and things were happening at home. It was time for me to get home and see about my own business. I got on the plane one Saturday morning after we'd finished work Friday night, and I came home. And I had no word from Eisenhower, President Eisenhower. I must say I spent a few restless days. One of his signatures was going to come down and grab me. But I have today, a full-page letter from Eisenhower thanking me for my work there and for my staying on. And they were most kind to me about it. I also have, with fond recollection, a letter that I got from President Truman shortly before his death. No, not too long before his death, yes. Just thanking me for, I had sent him a message for his birthday, and it was a letter thanking me for that and everything, and I have that. So those are part of my memoirs. But I have many more, of course. And my life in the Treasury was very interesting. We did the fiscal work. We did what you'd call the banking part, the money part of it. If they needed money at Baltimore, if they had a strike on the streetcar, we might call Brinks and send out $10,000 worth of nickels or something like this, you know. And every night the totals of the reserve, the bank reserve, or the Treasury reserve was brought into us. And then my part of it was I did reconcilements with Federal Reserve systems. And of course went out through the country making speeches and doing general public work of that kind, or I mean public relations, whatever you want to call it. And it was much pleasure and very interesting.
Yes, indeed. What were some of the particular changes in the bills that came up that affected your department, that affected the Treasury?
At that time, we didn't have too much change. The Federal Reserve had already been organized. The FDIC had been organized and was in force. And we had no great disruptions while I was there of any kind. It went very smoothly. Of course, when it came budget time, everybody was on his ears, toes, and whatever you want to say, to get their budget in. Because everybody needed their budget.